Well, we're glad to be back again today. It seems like this is home. There we go. Whoops. We're going to sing an old gospel hymn in the sweet by and by. We all have somebody in heaven probably that we're looking forward to seeing again. And that's what this song is all about. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar, for the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. To our bountiful Father above, we will offer our tribute of praise for the glorious gift of His love and the blessings that hallow our days. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. We shall meet on that beautiful shore. Yeah. Let me hold that till you get down. Okie doke. Okay. Well, we're going to talk today about one of Jesus' miracles. I love looking at the miracles, and I believe and take the Bible at face value. I was always taught to take things literally, unless they just cannot be. There are some things in there that are not meant to be taken literally, but in those cases, you look for the literal truth of that particular passage. But there's some lessons we can learn in the miracles of Jesus, and we're going to talk about one of them where He fed the 5,000 with just a small boy's lunch today. And our text will be John chapter 6, verses 1 through 14. And it reads this way: After this, Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias. A huge crowd was following Him because they saw the signs that He was performing by healing the sick. Jesus went up a mountain and sat down there with His disciples. Now the Passover, a Jewish festival, was near. So when Jesus looked up and noticed a huge crowd coming toward Him, He asked Philip, "Where will we buy bread so that these people can eat?" He asked this to test Him, for He Himself knew what He was going to do. Philip answered Him, 200 denarii worth of bread wouldn't be enough for each of them to have a little. One of His disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to Him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, so they sat down. The men numbered about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, and after giving thanks, He distributed them to those who were seated, so also with the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were full, He told His disciples, "Collect the leftovers so that nothing is wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces from the 5 barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. That's quite the miracle right there. Feeding 5,000 plus people with just a small boy's lunch, in essence. And keep in mind, back in Jesus' day, when they took account, the 5,000 there, they only counted men. So there were no doubt women and children involved in the numbering there. So who knows really the total number? We know it was at least 5,000. So we're going to talk about the miracle, actually the miracles, because there were several miracles here, and the multitude, and how we can practically apply some of these truths to our lives. Many, as we've seen in our text, many followed Jesus just to witness his miracles, just to watch. And that would be quite a sight to behold, the various miracles that he performed. And people were especially moved by his power to heal. And I think that's a big thing. Seeing the blinded eyes open, the deaf ears unstopped, the lame made to walk. All these things that we see in the Bible, it's just a portion of what Jesus did. One of the Gospels tells us that if they had listed every miracle Jesus performed, that there wouldn't be enough books in the world to hold them all. So he was quite busy in his short time here on earth. Jesus deemed it important to take time away from the crowd. And I think, and Shane, you mentioned that today. We get sometimes so busy doing that we forget to disconnect, to wind down. Even God, when he created all there was, he rested on that seventh day. And we forget sometimes, we neglect to take that time out, that time to get away, that time to rest. But Jesus deemed it very, very important. And then questions arose when the crowd gathered again. He looked and he seen the people coming. They continued to follow. They continued to come. And no doubt more and more gathered. Miracle after miracle brought more and more people to witness even more miracles. And he began to ask. He asked Philip, where can we buy food for all these people? Where? And how shall we feed this hungry crowd? And Jesus' disciples, they had a number of different types of people. They had a physician. They had several fishermen. But they didn't have a chef. They didn't have a chef. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but they didn't have anybody that says, well, I can whip something up here. And besides, how would you whip something up for 5,000 plus people? So he says, how can we do this? And how are we going to feed this hungry crowd? In our lives, we're going to find out that we have questions that need answers from time to time. We encounter things and we begin to ask ourselves internally, how in the world am I going to fix this? How in the world am I going to do this? How in the world am I going to respond to this? How can I go about and take the next step? What is the next step? What is the next move that I need to make? So questions arise in our own lives. And when they arise, we're going to learn how we can face these questions, how we can respond to these questions based on our text, based on this particular miracle of Jesus. Number one, when facing problems, remember God's power. God's power is unlimited. God's power is unlimited. I mean, there's no other way to say that. It is all consuming, all encompassing. Problems come to each one of us, no doubt about that. We've talked about this before. You may be facing problems right now. You may have just come out of a situation or a problem that you dealt with, or you may face one this coming week. Who knows? We don't know what the week holds. We hope for the best and we pray for the best. But problems come to each one of us, and that's a reality in our lives. And problems are often centered around people. Sometimes people themselves are the problems. People that we encounter can become problems. Sometimes it's just problems that involve people, like this particular group of people. They had a need. There was a need to feed them. It wasn't their fault. They weren't the problem, but it was just a need, and it involved a good number of people. And solutions to problems may require more than we possess. One of the greatest things we can come to the realization about is that we don't have all the answers. That's one of the things through the years when I've counseled couples or when I've counseled people for various things, I start up front that I don't have all the answers, but we can talk about this. And certainly we always start off with prayer, because praying to the one that has all the answers is a big help. And we see a lot of response, and we see how God comes through and interacts and responds and answers these questions that we have. So we may need to look outside ourselves for the answers. And that's wisdom right there. I believe it was Solomon that wrote that there's wisdom. In a multitude of counselors, there's wisdom. You'll find wisdom, because when you don't have all the answers, maybe there'll be some people, some friends, or that will have some answers that can help you out, or God will bring somebody across your path that will help you out, that will have a response, that will have the right answer for you, or the godly answer for you. Jesus was the first one to see the problem, and he normally is, even in our lives, isn't he? So, and he let Philip in on the problem for purpose. He let Philip in on this problem to test him, to see how he would respond. If anyone knew where to get food, it would have been Philip. He was from the area. He was from a town, Bethsaida, about 9 miles away. And so Philip was on his old stomping grounds right there. So he knew the area, and he knew it very well. So Philip started assessing the probable cost. He started thinking, and we've seen where he says even 200 denarii, which is in that day, which is better than a denarii was a denara was a day's wages. So 200 would be better than a half a year's pay. And he says even over a half a year's pay wouldn't be enough to give everybody a little bit. So he was looking at it from a very practical point of view. And whereas when you think about it, he should have been thinking, wow, Jesus, we've just been witnessing these miracles, and we've been walking with him and all this time since he called us. And he even told us on the Sermon on the Mount that he said, don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear, because God will take care of that. Yet that seemed to have escaped him right then and there. And I'm not being critical, because it may have escaped me right then and there too. Because you never know how you will respond till you're in that situation. But he started assessing the probable financial cost. But Jesus wanted to teach him that financial resources are not the most important ones. There was a bigger lesson here that Jesus was desiring to teach Philip. God never gives you a dream that matches your budget. He's not checking your bank account. He's checking your faith. And that's what Jesus was trying to do, to increase Philip's faith, to develop his faith. Now, Jesus was testing Philip in order to strengthen his faith. Jesus knew exactly what he would do even before Philip responded to his questions. Nothing, as we've said before, nothing takes God by surprise. Absolutely nothing. You can't surprise God. Philip focused on the problem, and he planned accordingly. He should have focused on the power of Jesus and just relaxed. Like we said, they've heard the teaching of Jesus. They witnessed all these miracles. They knew that nothing was impossible with God. And according to Luke 1:37, the angel, when the angel told Mary that she was going to conceive a child, and she never knew a man. But the angel said, for nothing will be impossible with God. And that still holds true today. Nothing will be impossible with God. And I'm so thankful that we serve a God of the impossible. Now, while God's power is all-consuming and all-powerful, we can limit what God does in us by assuming what is and is not impossible. Let me explain this. Even in the Old Testament, Israel, natural Israel, was known as God's own special people. And yet, the psalmist wrote that the nation of Israel limited God. How? By their lack of faith in his promises. God's a God of his word. When you read it, you can believe it. You can, as I used to say, you can take it to the bank because God's a God of his word. But when you begin questioning God or you begin saying, well, God can't, see, that's when we begin limiting God. Or God might do it for so-and-so, but he won't do it for me. We are limiting God in our lives. And by a lack of faith. Remember, without faith, the Hebrew writer said, without faith, it is impossible to please God. And then he goes on in Hebrews 11, and we see God's hall of faith. People that you wouldn't have even thought would be in there because of their faith made it. So do you feel there is some seemingly impossible task that God is calling you to do or he's leading you to do, or you feel that something that God wants you to do, but in your mind and in the natural, it may look impossible? Don't sell God short. Don't limit God. God specializes in things which seem impossible. I'm thankful for that. Don't let your estimate of what can't be done keep you from taking on the task. If we would have done that, we wouldn't have done a lot of things that God called us to do. We took some steps of faith through the years that didn't make any sense whatsoever from a logical, natural point of view. But we knew on the inside, this is what God was leading us to do. So we took that. We didn't know how it was going to work out. We didn't know, and sometimes where the resources would come from or how it would all pull together. But we took that step of faith, and God did his part. He pulled it all together. And in some cases, because of the steps we took, there are people serving God today who may not have been serving God now because we were faithful to believe God. And that's what God is looking for. He's looking for people who will believe, who will have faith, who will exercise their faith in him to do what he said he would do. So don't sell God short. God can still do miracles. And the greatest miracle I believe that God ever does is when he saves a soul. He takes a sinner and he makes him a saint. Takes us, as I've read before, takes us from the guttermost to the uttermost. That's the kind of God we serve. That's the kind of miracles. Those are true miracles. I've seen people who before they got saved, you say, what in the world? There's no way, I wouldn't take them to a worm wrestle, but God gets a hold of them. And boy, there's a whole change in their lives. And they, because of the life that they lived, can influence a lot of people that maybe we can't because we don't know, we don't have that background. So, never sell God short. Never underestimate what God can do. Just trust him to provide the resources. And that's another whole message. The Bible is full of people who trusted him in adverse circumstances, who trusted him in impossible circumstances, and God always came through. Another thing we tend to do as believers, we put God in a box. We say, well, this is the way God's going to work. And God can't work outside of this box. We're going to keep him in this box. And if anything else happens outside of this box, well, we know it's not God. Well, no, let God out of the box. Let him do what he wants to do. Don't be shackled. Don't shackle God. Don't limit God by what we do. Don't limit God by small thinking. By faith, take the limits off of him. Do that in your life. See what God will do in your life and see how you'll grow spiritually. Next, little is much when it is given to Jesus. You know, God's not all that concerned with huge and big. In fact, many times in the Bible we see where God had to weed out the big, bring it down to just a handful of people. And there's always been a remnant or a handful that God has used. I think of Gideon's army. He came with a couple thousand or 10,000. God had to whittle that down to 300, so lest they would think that they won the battle. But with 300 going against a mighty army, God won the battle through them. So little is much when given to Jesus. Andrew finds a boy with a lunch. I guess nobody else brought a lunch that day. Just this boy. Or nobody wanted to give up their lunch, one of the two. And some focus on problems. Others find people with solutions. Think about it. A boy, his lunch, plus Jesus equaled a great miracle. A great miracle happened. You know, and I don't know about y'all. Maybe you like fish. Maybe you like barley bread or barley loaves or bread. And I'm not a fan of either. But if I was hungry enough, I might eat it. That's what I'm told. Only 5 barley loaves, 2 small fish, and 5,000 people, 5,000 plus people. That would be enough to feed all of those people. See, God has often used, as we said, small things to bless many. For example, the widow's mite. She didn't have much when she put it in the collection, but she gave all that she had, and that's what mattered. Then there's David's sling, who brought down a giant of a man named Goliath, who was over 9 feet tall. Moses' rod, that was kind of, I initially thought of Moses' rod as being, remember Charlie Brown, Linus, his blanket, his security. That's his security. Well, that rod was sort of Moses' security because God used that rod. Remember when he threw it down, it became a snake, and God told him to pick it up, and it came that rod again. And he used that rod to cross the Red Sea. God used that stick. He used a stick. If God can use a stick, he can use us, can't he? What else? Gideon's lamps, you know, providing the necessary light that was needed. The disciples here are contrasted with the young boy who brought what he had. He didn't have much, but he brought what he had and he gave it up. They certainly had more resources than this boy did, but they knew they didn't have enough, so they didn't give anything at all. How many times does that happen? Well, I can't give enough to make a difference. Anything you give makes a difference. Anything you give to God makes a difference. The boy gave what little he had, and it made all the difference. If we offer God nothing, he will have nothing to use. But he can take what little we have and turn it into something great. When we give what we have to Jesus, he can multiply it and do great things, great wonders with it. Next, we must be willing to obey before we're ready to be blessed. We have a problem. Christians a lot of times have a problem with obeying God, with obedience to God. And for example, Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was all kinds of people from different backgrounds here. There were no doubt some of the who's who. There were leaders among these people. There were leaders of household, leaders of men, maybe some soldiers. People who are used to barking orders instead of receiving orders. Let they were being told to sit down. How humbling this sitting and waiting must have been for them. They were to obediently take their places. They were waiting to be fed from the lunch of a little boy, from the lunch of a child. This is different from so many today who worship big names and who worship titles. And one of the, is people like big name preachers. And they like they follow them almost like a cult sometimes, They just want to follow that one here or follow that one there. But we need to just follow Jesus, because he's the one that's pointing, that saves us. Our humble Savior gave thanks for the food, for that little boy's lunch. There was an orderly distribution then of the food by the disciples. Jesus would break it off and hand it, break it off and hand it, break it off and hand it. And I think that's important to notice, that there was an orderly distribution. There's nothing disorganized about Jesus. In fact, Paul, in writing to the church in Corinth, he says, let all things be done decently and in order. Some churches are, it's chaos. But God is a God of order. You look throughout the Old Testament even, and you see an order represented there as well. He will bring order into our lives. He'll bring order into our chaotic lives if we're really wrestling with things or having problems or issues that we need help with. God will bring order and resolve and calm things. Compare Philip's comments to what actually happened here. Philip said they didn't have enough money to buy even bread for each one of them to have a little. He said that in verse 7. After Jesus took control, after he brought order, after he gave thanks, they had as much as they wanted. The 5,000 plus people had as much as they wanted, and they were full. From 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, they got filled up. Wow, think about that. Let's look at the effect. In closing, let's look at the effect of this miracle. There were 12 baskets left over after they were full. They ended up with more than they started with. That's pretty amazing. There's a lesson here in the leftovers. God gives in abundance. He's a God of abundance. He takes whatever we can offer him in time, ability, or resources, and he multiplies its effectiveness beyond our wildest expectations. How awesome the God that we serve. And the key lessons I want you to pick up on here in this miracle. Number 1, there are hungry souls all around us that need the bread of life. And Jesus is called the bread of life in the Bible. They need Jesus. They're hungry. They may not even know what they're hungry for, but they need Jesus. Jesus wants to use us and what we have to feed them. I'm not necessarily talking about a natural meal, but that may come to that. Invite them over, cook them a meal. Share your testimony. Share what the Lord has done for you in your life. If we take the first step in making ourselves available to God, he will show us how greatly we can be used to advance the work of his kingdom. God wants to use each one of us to accomplish the advancement of his kingdom. Little is much when God is in it, as that chorus says. No matter what you have or how little or no matter what you have or how little or much you have, give it all to Jesus and see what he will do with it. I love how God works in our lives. And God works in us in different ways because we're different people. We're all different personalities. But God works in us and desires yet to do even more work in us. I don't believe God ever stops working in our hearts and in our lives. And I don't believe we ever quit growing in God until we leave this life. Until we leave this life and then we go to heaven. That's when we will have arrived. I'm listening to my wife too much. She says that. So anyway, I want to encourage you, and I hope this message encourages you to be a witness. That's really what it comes down to. Let your light shine to others. May God bless the ministry of His word this morning.